third video for this lesson, and on this video I'm going to kind of talk you through it because I think it's really important that you understand all this scenario with slavery. Now, the Amistad is the first time slaves were set free legally in the United States, which we're going to go over more tomorrow. However, this is some more background on the Atlantic slave trade. As we know, Cinque and the rest of the slaves on the Amistad were transported by the Tacora across the Atlantic. And this happened quite often throughout centuries. So as I talk you through this, you will stop it and ask a few questions in between. And I'm sorry, my voice is lovely. Lovely. The Atlantic slave trade.
Historians estimate that between 1500 and 1870, more than 11 million men and women were carried across the Atlantic Ocean in ships like these. The passengers were forcibly transported from Africa to the West Indies, Brazil, or other lands of the Americas. These people were enslaved Africans, and their lives on board the slave ships were filled with pain, suffering, and death.
Okay, at this point, you should understand that this is where Cinque was when he picked that nail out. He's under the hull in the ship. And that nail was his only way of surviving or getting out of slavery.
In the 1500s, Europeans saw enslaved Africans as a source of inexpensive labor for their colonies.
So, inexpensive labor. So you're going to ask her a question. In modern day, what is the big controversy today about inexpensive labor? We talked a little bit about this last week about China. How is China, not so much slavery, but how is China also providing inexpensive labor, which seems to be a problem for the Americas right now? So answer your question on the right-hand side, and then continue.
European planters established plantations or huge farms in North America, South America, and the Caribbean.
What were some of the products of these farms?
Plantations grew, more slaves were needed to work on them. Slavery had existed in Africa since ancient times. Some African kings and merchants captured people and sold them as slaves to European traders, as well as to Arab merchants. When the demand grew, kings often sent their warriors to attack neighboring villages for slaves. The Europeans treated slaves like cargo. They were locked inside cells for weeks until ships could take them to colonies across the ocean.
That's really interesting. They treated them like cargo. Human beings as cargo. Please answer the question that I provided.
For slaves, life on a slave ship during the Middle Passage was a nightmare. Even crew members were shocked by the conditions in the slave holds.
When I had to enter the slave deck, I was forced to crawl over the slaves.
Are you watching this? You had to crawl over the slaves. That's pathetic. That's horrible. Sorry, I just had to tell you that. All right, I'll keep going.
The Negroes are frequently packed so close together that they had not so much room as a man in his coffin. I was so overcome with the heat, dense and foul air that I nearly fainted. It was only with assistance I could get on deck.
Alexander Falconbridge.
That's a
Although
primary
the
source.
transatlantic slave trade, the bringing of slaves from Africa to the Americas, was abolished by U.S. law in 1804. Some traders chose to ignore the law. They continued to capture Africans and transport them across the Atlantic.
Let me just explain something to you. All right, 1804. Obviously, this is 35 years prior to the Amistad. but it's also prior to the Emancipation Proclamation declared by Abraham Lincoln. So what that means is they abolished slavery in 1804. However, if you had slaves during that time period, you can continue to have slaves. Slavery wasn't abolished. Bringing in slaves from Africa was by 1804. So that means if you had a plantation and you had slaves, you're good to go. However, you couldn't buy more slaves. That was illegal. But your slaves did have children, and therefore they continued this process. Just want to make that clear for everybody.
On June 28, 1839, the Amistad set sail from Havana, Cuba, bound for the Cuban coastal town of Puerto Principe. On board, Captain Ramon Ferrer carried a cargo of 53 African slaves, purchased in Havana. An African on board the Amistad named Senaba Pie fought the men who
We call
tried
him
to enslave
Cinque.
him and other Africans. One dark night, Senaba Pie, called Cinque by his captors,
Right.
unlocked his shackles using pieces of metal he'd found on the ship. Working quickly, he freed the rest of the slaves, and they prepared to attack their captors.
The movie is much better, by the way.
The Africans took over the Amistad. The cabin steward translated the Africans' demand: sail the ship back to Africa or the crew would be killed. Instead of sailing for Africa, the currents of the Gulf Stream pulled the Amistad north. In the summer of 1839, American newspapers along the eastern seaboard reported wild stories of a ship manned by black pirates. An American ship called the Washington found the Amistad and captured it. The ship, including the Africans, was taken into custody. The Spanish government, which had copied...
Okay, we are going to go over this in our lessons. So this is basically where we are at with the Amistad. So on Thursday, I'm going to check over these tonight, and on Thursday I'll give you back your results for your quizzes to go over all the questions. So we're going to get into whose property are these slaves, because if they treat them like cargo, they have to be somebody's property, and that's going to be the big debate. Are they Spanish property? Are they Americans' property? Are they Montez and Ruiz's property? That's all going to come down in a court trial, which we're going to talk about. So I'll see you guys on Thursday, and I'll give back the results. If you are done this option, you'll have a junior scholastic you guys can read. Thank you, and have a nice day. Okay, yeah, I will too.